So yeah, today's conversation all about quality assurance, and I'm so happy to see that we have participants in the room, such as Kimira Moodley, that will hopefully also join us as we converse about quality assurance in online education. And Sarah, now I think you already know that I'm going to be putting you on the spot with the first question regarding the processes that you implement at Stellenbosch University for QA.
Thanks, Eugenie. Yes, no pressure at all. So I have to first state that, of course, we've got the bigger policies within South Africa in the higher education institutions, and also more broadly speaking within the university, and I'll touch on those a bit. But my role is more specifically geared towards the individual hybrid learning or online learning offerings that we do. So it's more at a micro level QA, which might resonate with some of our participants joining this morning. So as I said, besides for the DHET and the CHE policies that we have, Stellenbosch University also has their own Q and enhancement policy, which I assume all the universities in South Africa and also around the world will have. And what I really like about this policy is, yes, of course, it acknowledges the formal and structured quality management processes that an institution has to go through, but it also highlights that quality assurance is a collective sense-making and reflection process. And that we basically use the standards from the higher levels and really infiltrate that in our individual offerings. At Stellenbosch University, within the Division of Learning and Teaching Enhancement, we also have a center dedicated to QA called the Academic Planning and Quality Assurance Center, and they are really responsible to ensure that whatever happens in the policy environment gets interpreted the university. So they assist academics on a day-to-day basis with curriculum planning, designing, reviewing, making sure our institutional audits happen, and that whatever gets said in those institutional audits, again, that infiltrates within the university space. Now, on a more micro level, where my role comes in as hybrid learning coordinator at Stellenbosch University, we've got a dedicated team developing hybrid and online offerings. And of course, when you put something online, you need to make sure that it is as 110% correct as possible. We don't want to put something on a learning management system or on an online platform such as edX with mistakes slipping through. Now, we're all human. I'm sure those of you with academic degrees, especially, you get so tired of reading your own thesis, mistakes slip through, whether it's as minor as a spelling mistake or a typo, or as big as a conceptual framework that you misunderstood. You need a second pair, a third pair, a fourth pair of eyes to go over that. So that's where I come in. I work closely with the learning designers on our team, and also even the multimedia designers with their multimedia products that they develop. And then from my point of view, I need to make sure that we follow the university's brand guidelines. Look out for spelling mistakes and typos and all these technical aspects that the navigation works on the learning management system. Of course, the learning designers also help one another, as I said, second, third, fourth pair of eyes. And we also, of course, rely on the academics or the subject matter experts from their point of view. Of course, from our side, we are the subject matter experts when it comes to learning or instructional design, but we don't always know or understand the content that gets put up there, especially when it comes to medical content. So you definitely also require your facilitators' input to go through their content before it goes live for students, to ensure that the quality is as perfect as possible.
Thank you, Ronelle. I see Annelies showing a little one there. It's time to be quiet. So maybe I'll jump over to you, Naval. Maybe you can mention also just your role within the institution, but for your processes, very similar to what Ronelle has explained now, or are there perhaps some things that stand out that are different? You're on mute.
You're on mute, Naval.
That's going to be one of our things that's going to be taken back from COVID. You know, we should have like a song here on mute. But thank you so much for having me. I am similar to Ronelle, the head of online education and course curriculum design. And, you know, when I was first invited to this panel, a lot of the sort of anxiety around QA, specifically, especially from a CHE perspective and from the national policies, is looking at how do we at the micro level actually implement from the policy level QA. So I think in terms of adding on to what Ronelle is saying, we do very similar approaches to course development. But within UCT, we do formal courses in terms of our online as well as our contact undergraduate courses. And so our QA is the same because QA is QA. And I don't think, and we don't believe that you could have different QA criteria because it obviously has to meet the national policies for quality assurance, which is mandatory. So UCT is fundamentally a residential university, but I think where the QA discussion has really morphed after COVID is looking at what does it mean to have, and maybe we'll talk about it more later, this idea of contact and distance in terms of the definition, where we're actually exploring a very blended approach. And so recently, the way in which I'd like to highlight from our institution is that we updated our digital and online education policy, which is a policy that really brings in the quality assurance, the IPD, which is our institutional planning department, and the integration of people like me or teaching and learning that segues into how do we provide a framing that allows for quality assurance that also meets the teaching and learning needs. And so we operate from a critical focus that says, you know, in both distance and contact modes, we're now having this blended approach, but even within that, fundamentally, we are aligning all our quality assurance. So I found that working closely with the IPD and looking at what they require at a quality assurance national level, and then at the university level with our digital and online education policy, which feeds into that. And then at a micro level, in terms of we are the front-facing, like learning designers or course developers that can start implementing and understanding what quality assurance criteria we need in order to support lecturers in meeting those. So, I mean, it's not an easy process and it's obviously organic and we all try to do better. But I think what has changed is really that intersection between like IPD, who is responsible for this at a higher level, and like the work that we do, and then data. So data has come into our processes where we look at like what are program and course conveners, you know, how do we work with them to lean heavily on program accreditation criteria and then to support quality, not just in terms of a checklist, but actually, and more than just a compliance exercise, but really as a learning experience so that we can support student success. So I think the shift is how all these areas that was quite disconnected, you know, are coming together and then opportunistically. And I'm sure all of you have the same experience. Lecturers are stretched, you know, they're really exhausted. We add on stuff. Now we're adding on AI disruption, you know, then you add on quality, then you add on blended learning and hybrid learning. And so how do we support this continuously adapting to the environment and provide quality assurance so that we meet the national criteria as well? And maybe we can talk about that later on in terms of the challenges, but really that's framing the way in which we work.
Thank you, Naval. I think that ties so nicely now with me asking Annelies. So Annelies, you are a senior curriculum development practitioner at TUT and you actually engage with the lecturers on a daily basis. Your QA processes and strategies for the online programs?
Thanks, Eugenie. Colleagues, yes, we follow the same kind of processes as described by the previous colleagues, but we try to make it as easy as possible for our subject matter experts, and we work with them really dedicatedly from conceptualization right through to implementation, through a tiered process where everything is brought together and all the role players. So the one thing that we have introduced that that's maybe a little different, and it might seem like an extra gate or an extra barrier. But within our internal process, you often have concepts to be approved at certain internal levels. And we know what happens in these bodies is that you've got HODs and you've got deans and very high management people, and they're reading emails. So they approve, but it's not really a quality process. So what we've done is we've added a task team right at conceptualization before PQM approval, and then right at implementation, and then bring together some role players from the university, people from the library, people from the management environment, people from the registrar, people from our quality, our dedicated quality office, so that they look at what we've done. So the subject matter expert, myself, facilitating the process, instructional designers, multimedia designers, program coordinators, so that we all work from the same page. So these little extra gates really, really help the quality process. And it helps our lecturers to understand that curriculum design is not this magical thing that's out there. They do curriculum design on a daily basis. They do it on a micro basis every single day. So now we just help them to fit this into going into a blended approach or going into a fully online approach. Thanks, Eugenie.
Thank you, Annelies. I hope Gerrit is still there with you, because the next question then, I thought I'd kick it off with the processes, because typically for those of us that are involved in quality assurance, you can kind of list the steps, off by hand. It starts with teaching and learning, and then it's at faculty board, and then it goes to Senex, and then it serves at Senate, and then we get our PQM clearance, and it's accreditation and CIG, and it's SACA registration, and we know the process is all too well. But when the conversation starts about what is quality, then oftentimes people kind of, you sit back and you hope someone else will raise their hand and speak first. So Gerrit, I was hoping from your perspective at WITS, quality in online education, how would you explain that?
Thanks, Eugenie. So I wouldn't like to differentiate between quality in online and quality in blended courses. As most of you know, that the accredited qualification and the associated learning program needs to be pretty much identical between the contact program and the online program, and so the process is pretty standard. There's some considerations that differs when you go online. The assessment strategies might vary slightly, and some of your learning activities might vary slightly, but on the whole, the process would be the same. I do want to say though that I do often see that some of our more longer standing programs, the way in which those programs were approved was pretty minimalist, and so the university would do as little as possible in the submission to the HQC process to get the program accredited. And so what we're trying to do internally is to move away from that, because everything that you don't do up front before submitting to HQC process is going to catch up to you downstream. So eventually you have to get to a level of learning experience design. You can't, for you to be able to implement. And so what we want to do, and this is not going to be a happy conversation, but at the time that we are ready to submit to our internal approval processes, that you already have the implementation documentation available. So the course materials in place, the course sites in place. And so when you look at the submission documentation, you can actually see already what the person approving requesting approving, what they mean by a specific outcome. What is it that the learning experience design is going to be to support students to achieve that learning outcome. Otherwise, what we find is you've got a kind of a broad statement about exit level outcomes and teaching strategies, but that framing is just so broad that anything can happen inside it. And so the broader you get with that framing, the more room you have for deviation from one offering of a course to the next, and from one person teaching a specific module to another person teaching the same module. So we get quite a lot of feedback from our academics. They're really set on their academic freedoms, and so everybody wants to do their own thing. But that is a challenge to quality of implementation of learning programs. So what you want to do with your learning programs is from 1 year, one kind of cohort to the next cohort, that the learning that occurs in that learning experience, that is comparable. It's can't be totally different learning experiences, because in the end you get the same degree certificate. And so from 1 year to the next is the one problem, and often you get two academics teaching on the same course, and the experience between those two courses needs to be the same. So when we think about quality, and as I said, not just for online, but generally, we want to do two things. We want to have a consistency in the offering, so that the same quality, whatever you want to see that as, from 1 year to the next. And then the second aspect to quality is we want to keep on improving. So every time that you've run the course, you have a review, and you see what worked and what didn't work, and you improve it. And so the process is you document your initial curriculum and the implementation, and then you teach according to that documentation. And when you see that something hasn't worked well, you go back to your documentation and you modify the documentation. And so then you teach the new documentation. So you've got this ability to maintain a consistent level of quality, but also a mechanism for continuous improvement. And so the final comment I want to make is, what we have seen is academics who started teaching in the online, started designing online courses and then teaching the contact programs as well. How much of that structuring of the learning experiences has actually found its way into the contact programs, and I think to the betterment of the student learning experience. Thanks, Eugenie.
I have to agree with you there, Gerrit. Although you don't want to distinguish between the online and the contact, I think the one thing that many institutions have taken away from going online is how it actually has improved what has been going on in many of the contact classrooms. I think there are so many more mechanisms and eyes involved with the online programs, whether you call them curriculum development practitioners, learning designers, LXDs, IDs. There are so many people involved now, together with a subject matter expert or lecturer, or what are other terms for them? Whereas oftentimes in the contact classrooms, and I'll now speak about my own experience so that people don't think I'm naming and shaming. I walked into that lecture hall. I had inherited some PowerPoint slides, which I could either use as is or adapt, and I never had a HOD or program coordinator visit me in that lecture hall. So some days we had very informal conversations, which the students actually enjoyed a lot more than having the theoretical lectures, but really no QA taking place in that sense. So for the audience members, because we'd like to engage with you a bit as well, I posted the question there for you to please define quality in learning for us as well. And so you're welcome to type that in the chat pane in the meantime, so that we get an idea of what the feeling is. Then moving on to one of our next questions, measuring effectiveness in education in general, but especially in online learning. I think a lot of the universities have all of the steps down to implementation, and then things kind of fall flat. So I'd very much like to hear from everyone in the room again, now that we've got all of the paperwork QA'd and we are sure that the alignment and so on looks really well, after the curriculum starts the implementation processes, what is there in place in the institutions to then maybe have a look at quality and the student experience. Naval, can I put you on the spot?
Yes, so I was really wanting to jump in and say to Gerard, like, what is the buy-in, Gerard? Like, how do you get all of that throughput and done? Do the lecturers actually like you? But I'll leave that for the challenges. Just to say that our mechanisms are obviously aligned to our course evaluations, our peer review, our internal and external moderation. So we have quite a sophisticated system that allows for us to have that level of reporting right up, and then we can check. But what we have sort of started, which is quite exciting, is that UCT plans on by the middle of 2025 to integrate a dashboard, which is a repository of data, which would specifically for quality assurance. It's a quality assurance dashboard that all HODs, all course conveners will have access to, and they will have real-time data in terms of that triangulation. So we've got a number of areas that we're capturing data now, and we found that the learning management system and what you were just saying, Eugenie, in terms of like, as a contact lecturer, you were quite alone, and now you have the presence of not just like a learning designer or a tutor. We now have an AI presence. We also now have data presence. So our learning management system has become quite an effective tool for us to draw that data beyond just course evaluations, and then we can all triangulate that into this dashboard, and that can be fed up right across to ensure that the QA is being met, but it's also more collaborative as opposed to punitive. So we're finding that our lecturers and our course conveners and HODs understanding how to use the data really enhance QA, so that we're not leaving them outside of that, and we're also not just doing a checklist. So we're moving from the idea that QA used to be very administrative and like you listed all those things, like a checklist, really into an academic integrated teaching and learning experience that supports the work that we do and integrates it. So this dashboard has been something that we really saw a gap, and we've also looked at our migrations recently to provide trust, building trust with lecturers in, especially what Gerard was saying, it's not whether it's contact or online, but really building that trust to say to them, okay, but what about this criteria? And then using the QA criteria to gently prompt that learning design process or that curriculum design process. So we find that the way you package QA is also important, and the way you support data supports QA is important, and the way it also intersects with course design. So I feel like where we're moving is finding more ways in which these silos are now being broken down, the barriers are being broken down, and we can support the process of QA without it just becoming like, oh my goodness, we have to do it, and we're going to get into trouble if we don't. And that's why I was really interested to find out from Gerard how that was being like received in terms of like that throughput that he spoke about, because we have grappled with that in the past. But I think bringing in a dashboard where they can say, like, we have this data process where it says, know your course, know your students. And that really brings in that social justice approach where our students and where their positionality is, what their NBT scores were, whether they, speak English as a first language, or how we need to support them for the online, not the blended approach, where we have found when students watch lecture recordings and they can see the captions and transcriptions, they're finding it more valuable for their success in understanding a concept, whereas they were sitting in a contact classroom, bums on seats, taking notes. Now they can watch lecture recording over and over and understand, especially when English isn't their mother tongue, or especially if they're differently abled. That level of blended then adds to the quality assurance and then allows for that student to be more successful. So we don't differentiate between whether it's like contact. We're finding that with the learning management, with enabled digital education, we're allowing for those mechanisms to come through and that criteria to come through. But it's almost like it's become like, is the policy, national policy, is DET's policy matching to the landscape and the reality of what's happening in the classroom? and how do we actually ensure that, when we define these things, we're actually looking at what is real. Because after COVID, I can't imagine like one class or maybe music or art, we were thinking labs, where there isn't an engagement with materials or with a level of like integrated digital technology. So it's more the affordances of it and capitalizing off it. And then those mechanisms can feed into all the tick list of annual program reviews, course evaluations, peer reviews through external moderations and equality mechanisms. But I mean, I think if my takeaway message for all of you is that it's not necessarily just the tick list of those mechanisms anymore. It's really about redefining and adapting to how we teach and all of the presence and the support that's in that classroom with you, Eugenie, that you were talking about. And as a benefit, not as a, oh, you're critiquing me or you're watching me or you've got this thing that's not saying that I'm not complying with QA. And that framing is quite important. So I hope that explains it in a very philosophical, roundabout way.
Thank you, Noble. I think you also addressed the question now that Yolanda had asking about capacity. So at UP, we are also moving in the direction of trying to create an integrated platform where all of these things are visible, where one could see, the students that are at risk together with the feedback that the lecturer maybe received, from a previous module, etc. So Yolanda, in response to that, I think increasingly institutions will learn from each other, which directions are they going, how can they use AI and other tech tools to automate much of what now currently is definitely taking up a lot of capacity. So I see we have about 2 minutes left for conversation. Yes, Renal.
Sorry, Eugenie, I just wanted to add on your and Nawal's discussion. One of the notes that I made for myself is qualitative versus quantitative feedback. I know at Stellenbosch University and probably at other institutions as well, the feedback that facilitators get of themselves and of their module or program is typically quantitative. And we've had many discussions on, for example, what does 3 out of 5 actually mean? What is fair? Because how I define fair and how someone else defines fair or excellent or whatever the case may be, can be different. And I mean, in our own team's QA processes, when I started 4 years ago, we started off with a typical quality assurance of an online education program. These are the checklists. Yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. And I quickly realized, yes, while quantitative feedback is important, I'm missing the richness of the qualitative feedback. And yes, this is just going to be more time intensive and add more labor to people involved in QA. But I really just wanted to emphasize as well that there's a place for quantitative feedback, but we also need that qualitative feedback, because facilitators look at the modules review from students and just think, oh, I got 60%, that's not bad, it's above 50, I'm just going to continue the next year as I've been always doing. But what are the issues that students struggle with? And it's really about bringing in more voices and understanding, because in the end, not to just call education business and that the client is always right, but who is our target audience, and we need to cater for them. If that doesn't work, then are students going to take home what they should take home?
Thanks for that, Renal. I think it also ties nicely. I was reading now through some of the comments on quality, and you've now mentioned the subjective or the instead of quantitative data, qualitative data, and it ties nicely to what Annelies also said when she thinks about quality. She thinks about students having a personalized and joyful learning experience. I don't think that that is something that should be overlooked, that we are so stringent on looking at, whether we meet all of the policy and forgetting about the student who is ultimately our client. Can you believe it? That brings us to 11:35. Gerrit warned me that half an hour is too short, and here we are. But I do hope that some of you will be able to join us later today when we are in Kuma Space, maybe just to socialize there a bit, or for any audience members. I've stalked all of these guys on LinkedIn. They are there, so go and befriend them and then ask them difficult questions. Thanks so much to everyone that attended, and thank you very much, everyone, for being here and chatting with us today.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks to Eugenie.
Thanks for the discussion.
Thank you.
Thanks all.
Bye.
Thanks, Eugenie.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.